Welcome to the Bothy, welcome to the Whiskey Bothy, in fact, not any old Bothy, specifically the Whiskey Bothy. I'm Ralphie, and this is review number 1089, and I'm going to be reviewing an Australian single cask rum. Right, there's a reason for that, malt mates. You see, it's Malternative time. And it seems to be a trend which is catching on amongst us all. A few years ago, for a number of years, by the way, I have been reviewing rums very occasionally, maybe one or two rum reviews, but nothing extensive, because essentially I run a whisky channel, particularly a Scotch whisky review channel. However, attitudes and mindsets are changing globally, and there's a lot of change happening in a short space of time. And it's really interesting to observe the online narrative, conversation and discussion, which is increasingly happening between the rumsters, who are essentially rum fans first and foremost, and the whisky fans, because now you've got rum drinkers going to whisky festivals and whisky drinkers going to rum festivals, including myself. I've been going to rum festivals in London now for quite a number of years, because it gives me a Malternative malt moment. It gives me a different feel, different environment, different flavour, different atmosphere, different engagement, and frankly, I find it refreshing for the palate. Coupled with this is that the point of recording this review, it's the end of July 2025, which is about the time of year where the Bothy is at its warmest, and it is a steady 21-22 degrees Celsius. And with the higher ambient temperature, although I enjoy a whisky, I get a notion for a rum. Here's a rum. I'm going to tell you all about it. I'm going to tell you about the distillery, why I selected this rum for review, and tell you where you can find it. But before I start, let's start with the actual reason for this bottling. It's down to the fact that it's been recommended through comments and personal messages from some of my Patreon subscribers, who are essentially whisky drinkers, and that the rums they recommended or asked me to review, which I'm happy to do so because they're really good options, frankly, are ones that, as whisky drinkers, they've really enjoyed, and they'd like to get my particular take on it. So there we are, malt mates. You can thank the informed, educated and invested whisky fans for pointing us towards this specific rum, which is Australian, from Australia's oldest distillery, which is Beenleigh Distillery, in Queensland on the banks of the Albert River. Now, the distillery was founded about 1884. It's a family-owned business and a very tidy little distillery. And if you're an Australian, if you are a true Aussie, you want to visit this distillery. I know you may have some distance to travel, but hey, if you're in Sydney, it's not that far to travel, really. The distillery, it's a fascinating story because the actual Beenleigh Distillery was founded purely by chance. Well, that's what the legend says, and I don't have any reason to disbelieve it. But essentially, a cargo vessel called the SS Walrus ran aground in the Albert River, and when they were unloading the cargo to lighten the ship to let it refloat again, they discovered a copper still. And whatever happened, probably money exchanged hands, and the copper still was basically hauled up on a rope over the banks of the river into an open space, and something was distilled. And frankly, they've never looked back. It's worth noting that certainly for the molasses that they use at the distillery, which they distill in both pot stills and column stills, it's locally sourced. It's indigenous Australian sugarcane. And just as Australia has quite a substantial wine industry, there is certainly demand within Australia. Hot climate all year round, and it's more fertile and green by the sea, so they're growing sugarcane. Fantastic. So it adds to the authenticity of it. All we need now is a bottling, a version of Beanley, which is very good at showcasing the best of this distillery. Because as whisky drinkers, we're setting our standards really quite high. So here we go. An introduction to this, and then I'll come to the bottle itself. You're getting initial impressions, a Jamaican funk and esteriness. But also notice that there is a rich and slightly resinous brown sugar style vanilla note, which is quite substantial, with a background of very soft powdered ginger, fresh peach, and a little bit of vegetation. I would say mint, but it's not quite. It's something slightly minty but different from mint. First taste, and this is at a cask strength. Initially sweet, very liqueur-like. I'm going to add water now. Quite resinous, that wonderful warm resinous notes coming through again. Totally beguiling, actually, because I'm trying to kind of break it down into its components, but I'm struggling a little bit because the flavour's so well integrated. The flavours making and contributing to this profile are overlapping a lot, so it makes it a little bit hard to separate them. So I've added some water, that'll help. 2 spoons, that's 10 millilitres in the glass. Let's talk about the bottle itself, and by the way, that's what you call a really lovely aesthetic label. I really like that label. I also like the information on the label, because the label is the contract, and this is where it really matters. Where's my steampunker? Can't go far without it. Distilled in 2014, aged 4 years in Australia, aged 5 years in Europe, bottled in 2024, single cask of 400 bottles, bottled at 64.2%. And the reference number for the cask is, and I know you're interested, AU14SB01. On the back label, you're getting even more supportive, endorsing information, which is really useful for us to know. The cask reference, basically ex-bourbon cask. This is cask strength, not high strength or batch strength. It is proper cask strength. Natural colour, additive free, and by additive they mean additional flavourings, which is perfectly legal in rum, so you better know it. But usually it's sugar syrup, just to sweeten up and make it a bit more rummy. But they've not done this. They really, really don't need to, and they know they don't need to. The sugar is 1.1 grams per litre, so they've actually isolated the actual sucrose content of this sucrose spirit. The esters are 41.2 grams per HLAP, and I've forgotten what that means. I'm sure one of you will remind me. And it's single blended rum. Single blended means from a single distillery and blended Probably a combination of pot still and column still. There's more information. I wish, honestly, you're reading my thoughts, by the way. I just wish as many Scotch whisky bottlers would be as open, transparent, informative and respectful with the information that they gave in whisky bottles. This has been bottled exclusively for a major British-based online retailer operating out of London called the Whisky Exchange. Now, let me just give you a reality check here. This isn't the first time that I've reviewed a Whisky Exchange bottling, and the reason is simple. It's because I trust their judgment and fully appreciate when you're a major retailer selling a lot of product for a producer, that gives you leverage. And it means that you know a lot about what you're selling because you've got the volume of throughput. You've got the scale. This means that when independent bottlers approach the retailer or are approached by the retailer and said, could you do a cask for us? They are going to do cartwheels to provide the very best version they can for a simple reason. It's phenomenally successful marketing, and that's the way it works. Now, there's another clue in this back label here. It says, developed by La Maison and Vellier, Rue Martin, Cliché, France. Right. Now, this is basically a European-based independent bottler who is the proprietors of the Transcontinental Rum line, which is an independent bottling brand, more or less for rum. And they are, from my experience, very well connected with phenomenal level of access to the international rum market. And that's what it's all about. If you want to get the best of casks, you've got to have the contacts. And often it's got nothing to do with a written contract. It's to do with a much more informal and historical contract, which you can read about in history books, under the title Conspiracy Theory. Leave it with you. Produced at Australia's oldest distillery, the single cask is a blend of pot and column still distillates that have been aged for more than 4 years in tropical weather of Australia, followed by nearly 6 years in the temperate European climate. On the nose you will find blah blah blah, on the palate blah blah blah, selected by the Whisky Exchange. And there we have it. You're getting more disclosure of this independent bottling of rum than you get on 90% of independent bottlings of Scotch whisky. Now, word of advice to the Scotch whisky industry: these are really tough times. Brighten up your act and give us far greater disclosure, because disclosure, I'm going to translate this, disclosure to the informed consumer is currency. Tangible, real-time, legitimate currency, and it helps making the decision as to whether to buy the bottle or not. So this is single cask, 10-year-old Australian rum. You can buy it online. Just go to the Whisky Exchange. 96, £98 a bottle. You're getting a lot of rum for the price, and in particular, it's the quality at 10 years old. It is excellent. So thank you to my Patreon subscribers for recommending this to me. Cheers. I've added water. It's creamy, it's slightly smoky, it's more woodsy, there's a more wood complex going on. It's slightly creamy, sugar, sucrose cream on the nose without being overtly sweet. It is increasingly aromatic with notes of red cola, mild cinnamon, roasted banana, and a little bit of, I don't know where it's coming from, but I'm getting a note of avocado. Yeah, there you go. Taste. Even with 2 teaspoonfuls of water in it, it's still banging out the flavour. Sweet and sour. Soft estery. The esteries aren't as blatant and as assertive as you will find in some Jamaican brands of rum. With Beanley, it's more integrated. It's worth saying, by the way, this isn't actually my first review of Beanley rum. It isn't. This is my second. I've encountered it before. I was very impressed with it then. I am still very impressed with it now. I suspect Beanley, at some point, is going to become a cult rum, in the same way that Caroni, or Caroni, depending how you want to pronounce it, has in a different way become a cult brand in the rum scene. There you have it. There's so much personality here, and I like the dryness of it. It never ever gets too sweet, which makes this a fantastic bottling for whisky fans who are experienced, because this rum is opening up, oxidising and developing in the bottle wonderfully well. And considering it's the middle of summer in Northern Europe and we're having a lovely warm summer, this is just the perfect companion. What score am I going to give this? I must say, it's going to be a generous score, because I really want to give positive feedback to the entire drinks industry that the time for this style of bottling with presentation of authentic narrative as its marketing is, the time has come for this. Absolutely. There's fruitiness coming through. It's like guava and gooseberry. You know that kind of bittersweet you get from gooseberry? You're getting that. Absolutely delightful. Now, I can't be too... I've got to keep this in relation to my whiskey marks. Here we go. 88 out of 100. And Malt Mates, that's a rum mark. So pop back for Ralphie Review 1089 Extras, which is coming along shortly. And I'm going to give you a little bit more background. If you happen to be a whisky drinker and you're wanting to understand and ease your way into the better quality rums, what do you need to know? Because there's something important that I really need to discuss with you that you very rarely hear as part of the commentary. And we know how important it is for Scotch whisky. It's equally as important for rum, and I'm going to go over that. See you soon.